Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome on what is in Melbourne a very warm afternoon. I'm sure that it's not afternoon in Mauritius, but it's probably still warm. Mr. Tony Cross, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing really well, Darren. And as you say, it is warm in Mauritius. It seems to always be warm in Mauritius, which is a blessing. So it's 9 a.m. in Mauritius. So good morning, Darren.
What a wonderful place that you live in, Tony, as well. It's I remember my wife and I went to Africa back in 1997, so a few years ago, and never forget the experience of as we're flying into Africa, just flying over Mauritius and the Maldives. It was just spectacular. What's it like? I've got to ask you, what's it like to live there?
It's fantastic. I've been here for 3 years. I love it, loving it. Learning to adapt to the Mauritian way for sure, because there are the differences, and we have a strong French influence, we have a strong Indian influence, but it's fascinating. The cultures are fascinating, the people are fascinating, the beaches are amazing. The weather is better than many other places I've ever been to or stayed in. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Internet connectivity is pretty good, holding thumbs, but yeah, it's a good place to live, certainly.
Love it, love it. I've got to ask before we jump into today's topics, does it ever get cold there?
It gets freezing. It gets to
Oh,
about
does it?
17 degrees centigrade in the middle of winter. It's terrible. I'm being sarcastic, of course. I come from Johannesburg, and it's sometimes gets to those minus numbers. But in Mauritius, when it's 16, people say it's freezing. So
Man,
certainly a tropical climate. Um, it pretty much some days it's 24 degrees centigrade in the morning when you wake up, and gets up to about 27. So it's a very consistent temperature. So
wow,
um,
amazing.
no complaints from no complaints from me, certainly.
Sensational. Love it. Love it. So look, I'm looking forward to this conversation. You are the Chief Executive Officer of Growth Matters International. And I've got to say at the outset, we were talking just before we pressed record, and I was saying we were actually talking about simplicity of communication, and certainly for salespeople and sales leaders, we need to, I guess, look at how we're communicating to our marketplace, but also to our people, and try to keep it as simple as possible. I love your mission on your LinkedIn site, which says your mission in life is to make other people successful. Well, actually, it says make others successful. So there's three words, which is super simplistic and super direct.
Yeah, no, yeah, well, thank you. I like to keep things simple, and Smart Brevity is a great book on the subject, as you know. So it's really important to communicate, clearly. So if it's 3 words or if it's 50 words, as long as it's got that clarity. And our mission, as you say, is to enable sales managers. But my personal mantra, if you like, is to make other people successful,
Mm.
whether that's partners we work with, whether that's sales leaders we work with, sales professionals, whoever that may be. Um, and I see it as a gift, and I see it as a privilege to make other people successful. So short and sweet, as they would say in Mauritius.
I love that. I love that. And if we take that a little bit step further, because I'd like to talk about strategy, sales leadership, and certainly the great work that you and the team are doing at Growth Matters International. Again, on your LinkedIn, it talks about helping millions of people in the profession of sales by enabling a million sales managers. If you can take us back a little bit, because I always love to delve into people's backgrounds in terms of what got you into sales in the first place. But for you, Tony, I'm really intrigued in terms of, was there a pivotal moment where you kind of made the decision that my role is to help others be successful? And why was it specifically in sales leadership that you felt you could have the biggest impact?
Well, that's a short question with a very long answer, but I'll try and keep it succinct. So I actually grew up in programming. So when I left school, I did a degree in computer programming and computer design, and we would code. In those days, it was COBOL, if you can remember that far back.
Yeah.
We used to write lines of code. So I worked for different organizations, and at some point, I realized I was average at it, and I was being paid quite well, but I was doing an okay job. But my colleagues would go home and they would, in the evenings, they would be writing programs for computer games and other things. And
Mm,
I would be going, I don't want to see another screen for the next 12 hours. And I realized I wasn't really committed to this career. And one way or another, I found myself then in a professional services role. And we did a road show and we did 4 events over a week. And I was working with this gentleman from the Netherlands. And I still remember we were sitting at the lower cableway in Cape Town. And we were looking up at the mountain. It was probably 2 a.m. We must have looked very strange to anyone who may have seen us. And he turned to me and he said, "Why are you not in sales?"
mm,
I said, "Well, the car salespeople or the insurance salespeople, what the things we have these biases, about." And he said to me, "You should be in sales." And I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "You build great relationships, you ask amazing questions, and so on." And he unpacked this for me. And I said, "Okay, well, that's something." And he said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start sending you books."
mm,
I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Because I think you believe that sales is all about the art of sales, where actually there's a lot of science in sales."
mm,
And with my background, he said, "You'll love the process, you'll love the structure." And long story short, he started to send me books, Stephen Schiffman and other authors. And I started to read it. And I said, wow, this is so different to what I expected. And I started to become a student of the profession. And I'm still a student of the profession, always learning.
mm,
So I decided then, you know, probably a few months from that incident in Cape Town, and I said, this is something I really need to get into. And I found myself in a sales role, became a sales manager, and became a sales leader. And I realized that through each of the levels, they have different roles, but we often blend them.
mm.
And probably 13, 14, 15 years ago, I started chatting to my now business partner, Alan, and he said, "Well, what's going on?" Because, he was training salespeople and they were loving the training, but nothing changed.
Yeah.
And I said, "I think it's because we're not impacting sales managers. We're not enabling sales managers." And we started on this journey to really enable sales managers. So that certainly was the pivotal point.
Mm.
Another long story, and I'll try and keep it short. Um, I met this one gentleman, and as we do in life sometimes, and they say, "No, I'm very perceptive, but I know what your mission in life is." And I said, "That's great, because I don't know what it is." And this is about
Can you
probably
tell me?
20 years ago. I said, "Tell me." And he said these words. He said, "You strive to leave your fingerprint on at least one person every day." And I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just, sharing the story.
Yeah.
And he said, "You are definitely a healer, a teacher." And he went through this whole thing and didn't, the first time I met this gentleman,
You didn't
and
know
I
him
was
before
going,
that at all.
I didn't know him before that. So maybe it's, who knows how he knew these things. Maybe it's an energy thing, who knows? But it started to really sit with me and say, I've got this opportunity to help others through teaching and help others through whatever mechanisms I can come up with. So I guess that's the two parts to the backstory. And we started Growth Matters International primarily because this is the arguably the toughest job in the world, this
Mm.
job of the frontline sales manager.
Yeah.
Sales leader in our definition is a leader of sales managers, but we're all in this world of sales leadership as you are.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know this may sound cliche, but every day, every week, we actually have this privilege and this gift of helping others be more successful. Whether that's through a training program, a coaching conversation, a sales pitch to a customer, whatever that may be. So yeah, that's a little bit of the backstory.
I love that. As you were talking, you're talking about goosebumps. I talk a lot about I mean, the description that the gentleman had for you was leaving your fingerprints on a person each and every day. I'm thinking, okay, you got to be careful how you contextualize that, right? But I listen to that and say this is all about having an impact and leaving people with an impact and how you make that person feel better for having had that interaction with you. And I've been following, and he's since passed now, but a guy called Bob Proctor was very big in the industry of personal development, self-development, and certainly sales. And he always talked about this concept of the impression of increase. And I've used that in my career to the point where very similar to you in terms of leaving your fingerprints, but creating an impression where when that person leaves your environment, they feel better for having had the conversation with you. They don't feel better about you because it's never about you, but they feel better about themselves or their profession or their opportunity for having had an interaction with you. And I think from a sales leadership point of view, and when I talk about sales leadership, it's the people who are responsible for the sales people. I think it's a very, very interesting concept to grasp. And I'd love your take on this because you mentioned that when you were talking with Alan a number of years ago, he wasn't necessarily getting the cut through, and we realized, hey, we need to talk to the sales managers who are the ones that drive the outcomes. How challenging has it been to try to get, I guess, the buy-in of sales managers, but before that, buy-ins of organizations who get the concept of, hey, we've got the frontline salespeople, but the way to really ramp up the performance is to work with the sales managers. Can you just talk about how hard that's been?
It certainly has been a challenge. In reality, the industry has made so much money from salesperson training, sales
Mm,
professional development. We're talking about huge budgets that run into, millions of dollars. And much of that spend has not really driven the impact, as you say. But it looks good. It looks
mm,
good that we're investing in the sales people. Of course, some of them are not going to make it, but the ones that make it will be fantastic. But overall, it's not really, if we're really analytical, it's not been a fantastic, value for the spend that we've seen in the last 20 years. So we as you rightly said, we said the impact is in the sales through the sales manager. And initially it was a really tough sell
mm.
because okay, but we get that, Tony, but can you not just train our salespeople first? And to the one point, I mean, it's I guess it's a bit of a joke between myself and Alan. I was sitting in the one call with Alan, and that comment came up. Won't you spend, just invest in our 100 salespeople
Yeah.
because we don't really have enough budget for both the salespeople and what you're proposing for the sales managers. And Alan tells the story. He says he felt me kicking him under the table, basically to say, just don't say anything, Alan. Because of course we can help salespeople. We do it all the time. And I said to them, I said, well, let me put it to you this way. If are you telling us we've got this amount of money and we can either spend it on the sales professionals or the sales managers? I said, then stop training your salespeople and divert that money to the sales managers. And they looked at me. I said, if this was my business, that's what I would be doing.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why. And we unpacked it. So in those early days, it was very, it's called a challenger selling in a way to say, you've got to challenge your thinking. We've got
Mm,
to change the way you see this problem because the problem is the same. The
mm.
problem is we want to drive sustainable sales growth. So the way you're seeing the problem is through training your salespeople, implementing a CRM system, doing some piece of workflow tech or in nowadays AI, whatever it may be. And these are useful solutions.
Mm.
But it really at the core is if you're not enabling your sales managers, you're not leveraging the spend. Fast forward a few years, and my friends at Gartner were talking about the role of the sales manager being so critical, and other organizations started speaking. So then it became an easier sell. What I will tell you now is it's almost done a full loop. And
Yeah.
we're back at the point where now the solution is, AI and, other technology-driven solutions. And I'm going, the problem hasn't changed. And frankly, the solution still at its core is developing those sales leaders, as you would call them.
Yeah.
All the other things are very valuable when you have an enabled sales leader, sales
Mm.
manager who drives accountability in the team. So, for
Yeah.
example, drives an accountability in using the new training, the new technologies, etc. So again, quite a long explanation, but that's the story, and I think it's been a great journey for us, and we continue to sell to CEOs, and we explain that this is the way we see the world of the sales ecosystem. I had a CEO tell me 2 weeks ago. He said this is the first time in probably 20 years of implementing different solutions that he's actually understood sales. I mean, those were the words he used. Um, and I was saying, that's amazing, thank you. Um, but what is it that we said? And he
Yeah,
said it's because you used a framework. You
yeah.
explained the thing through a framework. I was drawing a picture. It was a face-to-face meeting, and I drew a
Hmm.
picture. And he said, but I've been able to really understand now the elements of sales that I now need to enable in my organization.
Yeah,
Now, whether we do work with that organization or not, he's walked away, as you said so rightly, Darren. Your reference with Bob, he's felt that was a really good use of his time.
that's it.
And if that's all we achieve as salespeople in this particular role, that's amazing.
Well, it is, and as you said, whether you end up doing business with him and his organization or not, it'd be great to do that. But the fact that you've taught him something that and given him a new insight that perhaps was different or new compared to when you sat down with him. You don't know who he's going to be connected to. You don't know who he's going to talk to. It could actually be an opportunity that bears fruit from a conversation he now has because he's now been able to articulate, from his perspective, what actually sales means in that context.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, 100%. So, we really gave him what we would call a perspective.
Yeah.
Here's our perspective, or the modern term now is POV, point of view. This is a point of view on how we see sales and the evolution of sales and
Mm.
the challenge of the sales growth.
Yeah.
And as you say, he's hopefully going to be able to redraw it to, his colleagues, his network.
Yeah.
Um, but that is so important, and I think looping back to what you started with about communication, let's make it simple enough to draw it as a picture.
Yeah.
It's not to say the person I'm communicating with, is that level, but let's make it simple.
Mm.
Um, and 100%. So, we hope to do work with that organization, and we certainly believe we can assist them. But um, the strange thing, and this is maybe going to sound strange, when I came off that call, for the next 2 hours, I was bouncing around, even at this time of the year when we started to feel fatigued. I was going, oh, that was such a cool conversation. And at no point did I go, because we're going to get $1 million of business. It was just that was such a cool conversation, and I was
Yeah.
able to help.
Yeah.
Um, and I think as I'm reflecting on it now, talking to you, it's almost as if that's what we want salespeople, sales leaders to be doing all the time, is
Yeah.
having those great conversations where you come off and you feel energized because you've added value to that person, with or without the sale. Of course, our bosses are going to say, but you need to get the numbers. We understand that. But the numbers, as you said, are coming later. The numbers will come because
It is.
that person is going to turn to you at some point to say, hey, Darren, hey, Tony, I know we had a conversation a year ago and,
Mm.
nothing happened, but I'd really love to chat to you about some other challenge I'm facing.
Yeah.
And they will come back to you as the term is trusted advisor, as we know in the world of sales.
And that sort of term, as we all know, well, maybe not everybody, but it's very much thrown around a lot. Oh, I'm a trusted advisor. I'm a trusted partner. Well, how do you know that, right? Because a lot, and I love your experience around this. My experience is with a lot of salespeople, but also a lot of sales leaders. They spend a lot of time talking about how good their company is and how they work with big organizations and how they've got the biggest networks and the biggest widgets and all that sort of stuff. And they forget the fact that they're only there to do one thing, and that is to firstly identify a problem that a customer might have, and then secondly, be able to articulate that problem hopefully better than that customer can. And then thirdly, if there's a match, maybe give them the opportunity to have a look at it as a possible solution. So yes, you've got pressure on sales budgets and stuff like that, but I think, and I'd love your take on this, there's a right way of going about sales and a not so right way of going about sales because I also talk about the fact that the sale doesn't normally start until after a sale is made. So, particularly in the business to business space, you're going to be dealing with an organization, hopefully for a sustainable period of time. So, you've got to build that trusted advisor status, which takes time. So from your perspective, what are your thoughts on that in your experience and all the sales organizations and leaders and CEOs that you've worked with in terms of leading too much with a product to try and get the sale versus leading with service, leaving with servitude that then results in a sale, which is more of a natural consequence.
I mean, I don't think I could put it any better. The reality is this, that what you sell and who you sell for is less important than the sales conversation. And if you dig deep into the research, it shows it over and over again. And what I mean by that is if we're having a conversation, let's reflect on that CEO conversation that I
Yeah.
was having 2 weeks ago. Of course, he knew that I was from Growth Matters International because that's what the meeting said. But in reality, I never told them about the organization and I never told them about our core product, which is a sales management development program. I never
Hmm.
said anything about those two components in a
Yeah.
45-minute conversation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key because I didn't need to. I was talking about his problem and his situation and his environment and his vision, etc. And we see this, we read it all the time as salespeople, as sales leaders. That's what we should be doing. We should be, talking about the customer. We should be talking about their issues and their challenges and where they want to go. But we often don't because we have this pressure of the quarterly number, the quota. So it is so important. We're not selling transactions. If we're selling transactions, let's go in and make sure that we facilitate buying as quickly as possible. But
Mm.
in reality, that's not a sustainable model when we business to business selling, sales cycles over, let's say, 6 months, 9 months, even longer.
Mm.
We really have to look at it and say, how do we build sales over time rather than the mindset of let's go make a sale on this call.
Yeah.
And again, an analogy I often refer to is my daughters came to me one day and they said, "Listen, Dad, we're now looking for some work and so on, and I need to put together a CV, a profile, a bio, whatever you want to call it." And I said, "Fantastic. What is the job of a CV?" And they said, "Well, to get me a job." And I said, "No, it's not actually. The job of a CV is to get you an interview.
Yeah.
And the interview is probably to get you a second interview, and then the second interview is perhaps to get you a job." And they went, "Oh wow, but that's not what we learned in school, or that's not what I've read or anything." And I said,
Mm.
"That's the point. What is the objective of one of these calls? The objective is to open up a conversation,
Yeah.
perhaps to start a relationship. And when we're clear on that, we then stop trying to sell a product on the first call, where we know our average sales cycle is 3 months or 6 months or longer." So I think that analogy was quite important. And I said the way you write a CV is very different if you have that mindset, because then the CV is let me show the potential recruiter who's got 1,000 CVs or 100 CVs that I'm interesting and they should really want to talk to me. That's
Mm.
all it needs to do,
Yeah.
actually. Yes, you might have six other versions with all the detail, etc., but that's what it's supposed to do. And I think, Darren, that's the point with sales leaders is they need to be coaching their salespeople, that the job of a salesperson is to take a buyer through their buying process. And if they do that really successfully, you might not talk about a product until the third call, the seventh call, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, we live with these quarterly numbers. And even in our business, we talk about this all the time because we're out there selling what it is that we do.
Yeah.
And the stronger your pipeline, the more, let's call it, breathing space you have to do the right things. But
That's it.
man, it's so much more successful. We can win larger deals. And that's often the conversations we're having at a very senior level with organizations, sales leaders or VPs of sales all the time, to say that's the shift in the mindset and approach that you have to have
Mm.
almost before you try and enable someone through, training or consulting or technology.
Well, when you think about that, because I'd love to delve into like strategy, given that we're coming to the end of the calendar year, and for many organizations, the financial year, and planning for next year. And when you've got an organization or a team within the organization that perhaps is a little bit behind target or a lot behind target, the tendency could be, hey, all hands to the pump, let's do a fire sale, let's get things done because we need to do the gap closure strategy. Um, for sales leaders listening to this who might be in that situation, are there some key, I guess, thoughts or perspectives you can share that enables sales leaders or sales managers to really take a step back and think about some of the core things to focus on when it comes to developing a strategy, and even if it's just for a 3 month period to get us back on track or at least starting to create that impact?
Yeah, I mean, we see this all the time, Darren, is, we're in Q4 and we have to do this and all hands on deck and all hands to the pump and we really have to go. And I'm not going to say that's wrong because to be honest, sometimes you just have to do that. You have to, like you say, close the gap. The gap is
Yeah,
X and we need to close as much of this gap as possible. I get that. The challenge is always that if we're doing that at the cost of building future sales, what's going to happen in Q1, Q2 is we're going to have a gap in our pipeline.
yeah,
Now, again, this is sort of pretty obvious, and we know this. And many people will say, "But Tony, we don't have a choice." And I would say, well, you always have a choice. So you have to do both. We have to deal with two different time horizons for sure. And
yeah.
that's where strategy comes in. Let us have a look at the next 3 month strategy. We believe in a concept of what we call week 13. Let's make sure that we implement execution over 13 weeks. So we execute for 12 weeks, and then in week 13, we reflect, and then we plan the next 12 weeks, and we go again. And I think if you get into that cadence, there's probably less chance you're in this crisis mode. But
Mm,
if you're in the crisis mode, the first place to turn to, in my opinion, is to go to the pipeline and
yeah.
say, okay, let's look at the pipeline. But not to say, what can we close tomorrow? But rather to say, every opportunity in that pipeline over a certain value, perhaps, let's go do a deal qualification, a proper, spend the time.
Mm,
Let's spend 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour on a deal that has potentially, the impact that it could in terms of our Q4, rather than just rushing and saying to a salesperson, really just go see that customer and see where they're at, and maybe we can throw a discount at them or something like that. Really understand that deal and say, what is the one, two, or three things I can do or my salespeople can do to move this deal forward?
mm.
And if it closes in Q4, amazing. That's been a great result. But if it happens to close in early Q1, that's we've done everything we can.
Yeah.
When I was a sales leader, I always used to say to my sales managers, I don't expect perfect. I just expect your best work.
Mm,
That's my expectation. I just expect your best work. So if you've done everything to manage the pipeline well, nurturing pipeline health, we call it, making sure that you drive deal success, those big deals, making sure that you're coaching your salespeople, not doing it for them. If you're doing all those things right
yeah.
and the number doesn't follow, that I don't want to say that's not on you, it's always on you, but in reality, I've done what I can do.
Yeah.
But I need to be doing that, from day one, not doing that on day 364. So I don't know if that helps. Strategy, we talk about 9 decisions that we believe sales
Yeah.
strategy should enable. And you can do that for a 13-week period, for a 3 month period, as you talked
Mm,
about. At this time of the year, if someone had to say, Tony, what should I be doing? I would be saying you actually have to be doing two things. You need to be making sure you end strong,
yeah.
but you also need to be making sure you start strong.
Yeah. It's a really good point. Just on the 13 weeks, because I've been across it, and full disclosure, Alan's been on the podcast a few months ago and he talked about that and absolutely love the concept. So can you just explain for the people listening what the actual concept is? Because I've had the privilege of looking at it and being part of some of the programs that Alan has facilitated, and he talks about, and this is not a big statement, other than it sounds like a big statement. He says that when organizations can work on it and have discipline around those 9 key strategies or 9 key tactics, they can literally achieve more in 12 weeks than most organizations can in 12 months. Can you just talk a little bit about the power of that? Because there'll be sales people and sales managers listening to that and thinking, well, I get the concept because I know I've got to be focused on the vital few, but the problem is my vital few keeps changing because my senior sales leaders keep changing the narrative because there's a different agenda that's coming in every single week. So are there some key things that, like, even if it's not so much the nine, but some key things that sales managers should be focused on in that 12 weeks that give us the opportunity to be finishing strong, but also starting strong?
Yeah, I mean, spot on. So the concept of the 13-week cadence came off the back of a book and some research that we did, and the book was called The 12-Week Year.
Right.
And boldly on the front cover, it says, you can achieve more in 12 weeks than most people achieve in 12 months. So that was the core of our thinking. That was many years ago. We read this book and we said, well, that's amazing, but let's do some more research. And we all know, in the project management world of the different methodologies and the different cadences. So we started to research that concept. So the concept is for the next 13 weeks, we need to be crystal clear on what objectives we can shift. And then we need to be crystal clear of what are the expectations we need from ourselves as sales leaders and from our salespeople.
Hmm.
Crystal clear for the next 13 weeks. And we don't change those expectations for that period. But we have this opportunity in 13 weeks to make adjustments. So that almost the mindset you feel a little bit more relaxed about it to say, actually, I don't have to, throw everything out, and I also don't need to wait until the annual, sales strategy exercise that happens, next year, September. I know that I'm going to do this and I'm going to gather information to see what's working and what needs adjustment. So that's the concept is to build this operating rhythm of 13 weeks. So we sprint, if you like, for 12 weeks. We have that 1 week where we go, okay, let's look at each of the elements. Let's look at our strategy. Let's look at our execution. Let's look at our planning, our culture, anything that's happened in this 12-week period, and then plan the next 13 weeks.
Mm.
But we're not shifting the goalposts because, the annual strategy, the annual target remains the same.
Yeah.
That's the top of the mountain for this period. So that's the concept. In terms of advice, I will always say this, that, if you can coach, now, of course, if you've had a whole year of coaching and you got into a great rhythm of coaching, that's outstanding. But even in this period where we're feeling the pressure, go
Mm.
and coach a deal. Go and coach somebody on their pipeline. And the coaching component is not telling them what to do, because that's our gut instinct is we're going to tell them, especially now with this pressure, but teasing out their own thinking. So I would be saying go and coach. And if I had to say around what, around the big deals in your pipeline, those deals that perhaps we could bring forward from January into December,
Yeah.
those deals that we could bring forward by a month, and look at your pipeline. It could be an account if let's go coach on a big account and see where we can get new opportunities. But that's unlikely because we're sitting in Q4. But that
Mm.
certainly is going to build Q2 or Q3. So
Yeah.
that could be your component of your future. But like it or not, we can complain about it or not. We have to protect the Q4 as well as we have to protect Q1 and Q2.
Yeah.
So one way or another, we have to live with that, as I said earlier, the two different time horizons. So as a sales manager, I would be saying, okay, I'm going to spend two-thirds of my time perhaps working on things that can happen in Q4, but a third of my time has to be dedicated to making sure we don't start poorly. Um, you can look at many areas, as you say, the nine decisions or the nine disciplines that we teach, you can have a look at those. But I would say coaching deals and coaching pipeline
Mm.
probably will be the two levers that I would be pulling if I was, behind on the number going into, let's say, the Q4 period.
And that's it's a great way to focus on it. As you were talking, I'm thinking back to about 2011, maybe 2012. I was working as a sales leader at a company called Telstra. And in Telstra, we had the year of the coach, where all of the us sales leaders within the enterprise and government space, the whole point was we needed to spend more time coaching our teams, coaching them on development, coaching them on pipeline, coaching them on deals. And we brought in organizations to help us, and some of them really embraced it, and we got some good results. And I just happened to have been started a coaching diploma at that particular time. So, mate, I was in my element. I just absolutely loved it. But I'll never forget at the end of that year, we were at the sales kickoff the following year, and there was a couple of sales leaders, and I won't name them, but they were from Queensland. They're probably not listening to this anyway because I don't think they're exceptional sales leaders. They said, Tony, and I quote, "Thank Christ that is over because now we can get back to what we do best, and that is telling our people what to do." Um, so the point I make there is, as sales managers, we should and must not underestimate the power of coaching. And I've heard you say this, and I've heard Alan say this, that coaching is often the first thing is either cancelled or rescheduled, but the last thing that's actually measured. And sometimes people look at coaching and they say, well, how do I measure? What's the metric around that? And sometimes it's really hard to quantify, but the impact that it can have by helping people focus on the right activities that will drive the right outcomes, but through that process drive the right impact is something that sales managers should actually grab hold of and really and double down on. So with that, one of the challenges that, and you've probably experienced this as well as a sales manager and a sales leader, it's the it's the meat in the sandwich concept where you've got the expectations from your salespeople. You're trying to drive performance, you're trying to drive encouragement to keep the pipeline viable. You've also got pressure from above. Um, with all of this, even thinking like the 12-week program or the 13-week review, um, some tips and thoughts on for sales managers on how to best communicate upwards to reset expectations or to not so much protect their team or shield their team from some of the stuff that's coming down, but I guess better manage the environment that enables the team to focus on the things that will drive momentum.
Again, it's not a one size fits all answer, but I love the question because so many sales managers, share that with us. That's great, Tony, and I want to try and do things with my sales people, but I look upwards and that's not necessarily what they think I should be doing. And I always say it this way. Imagine you look at a normal week, and let's say there's 40 hours in a week. Some of us are working 60 or 30, whatever it may be. Imagine at the end of the week, you could answer this question. What was the one thing I did that significantly moved the development of my people? Now, that may only be 2 hours. That's at 2 hours. Let's say I did 4 coaching conversations, 30 minutes each with my 4 people.
Yeah.
And at the end of the week, it was crazy. It was a chaotic week. And, my expectations from above were all over the show. My people, hit and miss. Yeah. But I spent 4 hours coaching my 4 people each on a deal, for example. Actually, you've had a good week. The challenge is we're often in this chaos. And then we get to the end of the week and we reflect and we go, you know what, I didn't do, I didn't do my 8 hours of coaching I set out to do this week. I'm a failure. That wasn't a great week, whatever it may be. And then
Yeah.
we get into this blame and we go, we blame the organization, we blame the bosses, whoever that may be. And I'll always say this, look in the mirror. Just protect those 2 hours, those 4 hours, whatever it may be. What's the one thing? And I would encourage sales managers to keep asking this question. What is the one thing I can do such that everything else is easier or unnecessary? And they
Yeah.
and they program their brain to go, in this week, I'm going to make sure, even in the chaos and the rescheduling and the madness of double booked meetings and that we all operate in, I'm going to dedicate 2 hours to coaching or 4 hours, whatever it is. Not
Mhm.
make it, I'm going to do 16 hours, I'm going to do the year of the coach. So what I like about the year of the coach, it becomes a theme and people are talking about it. So that's great.
Yeah.
But it should never be the year of the coach. It should
No,
be, this is the way we do
that's
coaching. So,
right.
I like the theme and the year of the coach, nothing wrong with that. But not that we're going to coach for a year and then think everything is fixed. Coaching has to be part of our cadence.
Yeah.
In my world, the same thing. I'll set out and I actually follow a very, I guess, disciplined process. At the beginning of each week, I fill in what I want to achieve for the week. And
Yeah.
then I write the one thing. In fact, there's a block that says the one thing is dot, dot, dot. And sometimes it's hard to work out what is that one thing for this week because there's actually this one thing and this one thing and this one thing and this one thing.
Yeah.
But I always go, I'm going to force myself to say, what's the one thing that at the end of the week, I'll be looking back saying, that was a successful week. So that's a piece of advice. So what's the one thing? Really, almost narrow your focus even more than what you perhaps think is possible to
Yeah.
say, that's what I'm going to achieve. Whether it's the coaching, in Q4, Q1, wherever it is. What is that I'm going to do this week? Um, yeah, I mean, again, just to add, as I said earlier, this is a tough role. And sometimes in a class, a manager can say, "But Tony, you don't understand," and Tony, this is my world, and I say, I do understand, and I try and empathize, but this is the toughest job in the world.
Yeah, it is.
We are going to help you make it significantly easier if you trust this process. But in reality, this is the role you're in. So I'm never going to stand in front of a classroom and go, "No, it's actually quite easy. You really just got to do a few basic things," or, "This is the silver bullet for 2024. Just do that. Just use AI, just use social selling, any of those, fads, if you like."
Yeah.
Um, I'll always say this is a tough role and it's probably always going to be. But how can we make it, where you are driving impact, in a structured way? So I'm hoping that's helpful.
No, it is, and as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, and this one thing still needs to be focused on and part of the 12-week focus areas as well. So it has to be aligned. Um, the challenge with all of it, and I love the way you articulated that. We need to be clear with sales leaders that and sales managers that this isn't an easy gig and it's not for everybody. And unfortunately, I was having this conversation today actually with somebody and was saying that there are some sales leaders that are thrust into a sales leadership role because they've been great individual contributors. So the business says, "Hey, Tony, you're a fantastic salesperson. I'm going to give you 5 or 6 salespeople to now have responsibility for. Go and turn them into you." And they're not given the transition plan. But equally, there are people who probably have more capability and competency around being a great sales manager who don't get the opportunity because their numbers are not necessarily where it needs to be according to the business. And so I think the work that Growth Matters International is doing is a great, and it's a desperately needed ecosystem to help those sales managers make the transition. And for the ones that are there, give them the tools and the thinking processes to say, "Hi, this is not an easy role, but there are some fundamental things that if I do these things consistently with the right support and the right buy-in, we can actually generate some significant results and change the narrative and change the whole environment of our organization." So it's not easy. It is not easy.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you put that. And in my experience, we often run a cohort or a group of sales leaders, sales managers, and we have a few sales professionals that are about to become sales managers as soon as an opportunity arises. And when organizations do that, we always go, "That's amazing," because they're investing in them before they're in the role.
Mm,
And let's call them bench players. They're on the bench as potential sales managers. And sometimes one of two things happens. They really go, "Wow, this is a tough role, but I love how we're being enabled to be able to do this role more effectively." Or they look at it and they say, "You know what, this role's actually not for me."
mm,
Either way, it's a good solution. We've had salespeople, on a program and they go, "Okay, finally, now I get, what my managers is trying to get right. You've just put it in a different way, a different framework, perhaps." So
mm,
they really enjoy it. So invest in those future sales managers because many of them are going to be better at it because even if they're not necessarily the top performers in sales,
mm.
because your top performer can be there because they were lucky. They can be there because they got a great patch and a great portfolio of clients. They took it over from someone who was successful.
Yeah.
Um, of course, sales managers, we want them to be great salespeople, but often we've seen in our experience the best sales managers were average players. They were average salespeople,
Yeah.
or let's say above average salespeople.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily given that chance, but they have those leadership skills. They have the
Yeah.
the right mindset to move into, success through others rather than as an individual contributor. Fascinating subject, and many organizations we believe don't always get this right.
Mm,
They don't invest early enough in their future players. And I mean, sometimes we'll be training a group of people and they'll only be the new managers. And we're going, "Okay, but you're losing an opportunity for this more senior guys to share some experience and vice versa.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a fascinating field, as you know, Darren.
It's a really frustrating field sometimes, Tony, because you then get people who, oh, I've been a sales leader for 15 years. I don't need to go to this training because I know it all, right? Which says, wow, we've got a bit of work to do with this particular person. The other challenge I wanted to ask you about is, and we kind of alluded to it, that you've got the great salesperson who was anointed, who wants to make the transition to sales leader, who gets into a sales management role, has now the responsibility of taking care of a sales team. And ideally, through Growth Matters, you talk about the fact that it's all about driving the numbers, executing the strategy through the people, and driving customer value. So, can you just spend a few minutes talking about your experiences around um, salespeople making the transition into a sales management role, and in that transition process, some of the challenges that they face that they have to learn a new set of skills and you have a new set of responsibilities and almost resist the temptation not to be the glorified salesperson or the senior salesperson. I see this happen all the time in the work that I do, that sales leaders get the responsibility, but they still love the hunt. They still love the outcome. They still love the accolades that comes with the big deals, and therefore, through the process, either rightly or wrongly, they disintermediate their salesperson. They just become the salesperson. Um, in terms of the role of the sales manager, because you mentioned before, they still need to be good salespeople. But if you think about, I guess, the delineation, what are we actually looking for from a sales manager? Do we want a sales manager to be the salesperson, or do we want the sales manager to create an environment where the salesperson can be the very best salesperson they can be without being sold upon?
Yeah, I mean, we do see this, we see this playing out all the time. So sometimes I'll draw a whiteboard story and I'll say, when you're a sales professional, when you're an individual contributor, what do you really enjoy doing? And I'll say, well, interacting with the customer. Okay, what else do you need to do? No, we have to do admin and we have to report to the organization. Okay, cool. That's what you love doing. No, no, we don't really love doing that. We love being in front of the customer and really helping the customer solve problems. And we go, amazing. Now, as a sales manager, you're going to do less of the customer work and more of the admin and internal reporting work. How's that going to sound? Well, that's not right. And then we say, well, that is the role of the sales manager. And oh, yes, by the way, you also then have to create and train and coach and mentor and do all those. You have to develop people. So that's an added role that actually you don't have the skills in.
Hmm.
And then you look at the salespeople who wants to transition and they're going, oh, okay, so I'm going to do less of what I really enjoy doing, more of what I really hate doing. And I've got this new role that I'm not enabled in. And we go, yeah, exactly. Now, no CEO or learning and development person or sales enablement person ever thinks like that's what I'm going to do. But if you break it down, that's what we're doing, and then we
Hmm.
don't necessarily enable them quickly enough. So the job of a sales manager, as you rightly said, is to get the number by executing the strategy through your people who drive customer value. So four things, not one thing. So when I'm a salesperson and I become a sales manager. And when my numbers, my team numbers are down, where's my default behavior going to be? It's
Yeah.
going to be get me in front of a customer.
Yeah.
Let me go close that deal. And then we get that ego rush of closing the deal. And the salesperson might say, hey, high five, Tony. Yeah, one day I want to be like you. And you're going, oh, this is amazing. So we default to where we were good at. Now, we have other sales managers that came through a different route and they weren't necessarily in sales. Perhaps they were in professional services or development or operations or admin. And they where do they default? They go to the admin.
Yeah.
So then they're sitting behind another set of data, another spreadsheet to try and help the results. And we go, neither of those behaviors is great. The greatest impact you can have is to default to the third component, which is to go and develop your people.
Hmm.
Darren, we will never say to a sales manager, you can never go see a customer. You can never go get involved in a deal. Why would we say that? Go and get involved in a deal. Go get involved in both the escalation, the negative side, and the positive side.
Yeah.
If you need that quick ego rush and I've still got it, please go do that. But that can't be more than let's say 15, 20% of your role. Never,
Yeah,
never, it should never be that because then you should rather be an individual contributor.
that's it.
Your job is to go and get the results through your people, not for your people.
Mm,
So go there and you have to coach. And yes, you've got to do the admin and the reporting and all that internal, things that perhaps you need to get more efficient at. But your biggest impact comes from the third block, which is developing your people. And I mean, you said it so well. We need the mindset, but we also need the skill set. We need the
yeah.
skills in how do you actually develop a sales professional?
Mm,
Even one that's, above average or really good, how do you get them to the next level? Well, that is the job of the sales manager.
yeah, yeah. I love it. And I always say to sales leaders that are new to the role or thinking about moving to the role, think very carefully about why you want to be a sales leader because it isn't for everybody. And I've seen a lot of sales leaders who almost thrust into, and I talk about it, getting thrown to the wolves, and they don't have the transition plan. They don't have the skill set or the training or the mentoring to make that transition. And they literally end up saying, you know what, this is not for me. And they go back to being an individual contributor. And unfortunately, there are a lot of organizations that miss the opportunity of what could have been a fantastic, highly potential person who now is lost to the leadership ranks and therefore potentially not influencing as many people as they could. So I think the role of like the coach is such an important thing.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, the last thing I want anyone thinking is, oh, this is doom and gloom. It's
No.
terrible to be a sales manager. It is the most rewarding job too.
Oh, absolutely.
When I was a sales manager and I was working with a salesperson and, we were doing deal reviews and deal reviews and deal reviews, and I was almost at the end of my patience. And suddenly one day something clicked and they came to me and they said, Tony, look at me. I've got a new deal and this is what I've done. And this is the next steps I believe. And, just to check with me. And I was going, wow. And I guess when we're in those frustrating moments where we're going, oh, this is a tough job, we forget that this is a calling, if you like. This is such a rewarding job
It is.
when the person that we're working with gets it and
Yeah.
they take a step up and they're, potentially they've never been on the stage at the annual awards and you're working with them and working with them and they make it to the stage. I mean, again, I think any sales leader listening will relate to some stories that they've had
Mm.
where, a person that was struggling, made it through something that they
Yeah.
helped them with. I mean, that's incredible. That
Oh,
that
it
is
is.
that is truly an opportunity and a privilege. So it's the toughest job in the world, but when done well, it is amazing. It is honestly, it's an amazing role. The impact that we can have on our team, on their families, on the customers that we're serving is massive.
It is, and that's why I love what's on your LinkedIn profile, making others successful, because it really talks to the fact that the sales manager is not there to, win all the accolades. The sales manager is there to develop other people so they can be successful. And through that process, the sales manager has their leadership shadow hopefully extended. And the fulfilling part of that is you're a sales manager today, you might be working with somebody that the impact you're having on that person is going to have impact on people 5, 10, 15, God forbid, 50 years down the track that you have absolutely no concept of. But that's how far your leadership shadow extends because you invested the time in that person up front to help them become successful. So it is, I agree, it's such a privilege, absolute privilege to be in that role.
Oh, I love what you said there, the leadership shadow. We can talk about legacy and we can talk about these concepts, but I love that. What
Yeah,
what is my leadership? What is my leadership shadow?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
who's the I'm going to create great salespeople, but imagine if I was creating great sales leaders too.
absolutely. Absolutely.
That would be proper legacy.
Absolutely. So, Alan, I am conscious of time, and I do appreciate you jumping on a Friday morning from very temperate Mauritius. Um, every now and then, I like to ask a guest, given that this is the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast, and I don't ask this of everybody, so I think you're about the third person I've asked. Um, a question without notice: what's your definition of exceptional?
I think That's a great question, and thanks for not preparing me for the answer. But I would say exceptional is surprising. So what I mean by that is when we have those surprises in ourselves, in the people that we're leading, it comes as a oh wow, did I achieve that?
Yeah.
One of our colleagues, Wendy, and she often will say, come off a coaching call and say, "Oh, that went really well. You should have heard the amazing things that they said, and they were sharing their life journey. And I mean, we've heard things like this is life changing, and so on." And she's always surprised. So maybe that would be a definition is, I'm great because I know I'm great, and the scorecards say I'm great, and that's amazing. But when you're exceptional is when you actually like, was that
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Like that's incredible feedback.
Love it. Love it. And if there was one piece of advice as we sort of ramp up into the end of Q4 and into Christmas, the new year, that can help sales managers, sales leaders that we haven't sort of talked about, if there was one lasting key piece of advice or key perspective you'd like to give them in terms of something to grab hold of, what would that be?
I would say slow down to speed up.
Mm,
So what I mean is if you're in the parts of the world where over Christmas and New Year you take some time off, then take that time off. Really recharge ahead of the new calendar year. If you're in some parts of the world that keep it very tight and it's not a long holiday, then even then take the time to slow down and to plan the next, perhaps it's the next 12 weeks,
yeah,
perhaps it's the next even week. So slow down to speed up because so much of the time we're rushing and we go, 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 and we've got the pressure, etc., that we don't just, breathe and say, okay, let's write out a list and then let's work out what's the one thing that I need to do this week that's going to move the needle. So perhaps it's certainly going to resonate with me coming towards Christmas and New Year. I'm going to take 2 weeks off, so it's going to be a slow down to speed up a piece of advice.
love it, love it, absolutely love it. Tony, greatly appreciate you being on the podcast. For people that want to know a bit more about you, where can they connect with you? But also knowing a bit more about the great work that Growth Matters International is doing, where's the best place for people to find that out as well?
Yeah, many ways. Obviously, the website, www.growthmattersintl.com. That's a good starting point. People are welcome to email me. It's quite simple, Tony C at growthmattersintl.com. LinkedIn, I do enjoy LinkedIn, so welcome to connect on LinkedIn also.
Brilliant.
And Darren, it's been a really enjoyable 1 hour of chatting to you. So thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Tony, thanks again on a Friday. I know how busy you are. And yeah, greatly appreciate being on the podcast, my friend.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
All the best. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.